What's up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Danelle Hallan, and I am back with another true crime video. And today we are going to be talking about the disappearance of 30-year-old Ebonee Spears. And just like the case that we looked into last week, Shane Fell, Ebonee's case is one that just did not get the amount of attention that it deserved and needed. Ebonee was a young mother from Wilmington, North Carolina, and that's made this case hit that much closer to home. You guys know I'm a North Carolinian. I love the beach. I've almost moved to Wilmington. I almost went to school in Wilmington. This is a place that I'm very familiar with, and kind of seeing how the case was treated and seeing the circumstances of her disappearance honestly were quite sobering. It's just one of those that hits way too close to home. She was struggling with a physical illness, mental illness, and she was in need of support. And one of the most shocking aspects of this case is the fact that Ebonee, one of the last places she was seen was at a police station. She was looking for help. And somehow, after leaving this building, a place that's meant to keep her safe, she vanished into thin air. And now here we are, nearly a decade later. Her daughter is still without her mom, her family is still without answers, and the community is still waiting for the truth. So let's go ahead and dive right into all of the details. Ebonee Spears was born on May 12, 1985 to Harriet and Alfonso Spears in Wilmington, North Carolina. So this was the place where she was born and raised, the roots of her whole entire childhood and life. She was the youngest of 4 children. I think there were 2 boys and 2 girls, and she was the baby of the family. And her mom has said that she remained that way even until adulthood. Like, they all loved her, they babied her, doted on her. She was the center of the family. And from a very young age, Ebonee was known for her bright spirit and her outgoing nature. She loved basketball. She played at New Hanover High School. She absolutely loved being around her friends and family. She did well in school. The kind of person that said she would talk to anyone. She was a true social butterfly, and she had lots of different things that she wanted to accomplish in life. And at around 17 years old, just before she graduated her senior year, Ebonee ended up becoming a mother herself, giving birth to her daughter, Anaya. And from that moment on, her world revolved around caring for Anaya and ensuring that she grew up surrounded by love. Harriet has shared so many times that Ebonee was a devoted and attentive mom. She always put Anaya's needs above her own. She cherished every single milestone that her daughter achieved. Now, Ebonee had left high school with dreams of possibly working in healthcare or maybe pursuing modeling. Both of these plans she was incredibly passionate about, and so after graduation, she ended up moving very briefly to Georgia in pursuit of some of those new opportunities. And she did dabble a little bit in modeling, but ultimately she decided to return to Wilmington, where her roots and her support system were. And so now that she's back at home, she enrolled in school again. She stayed focused on building a future that she could be proud of. And in those couple of years after she came home, everything was great. Ebonee held a position at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, and for a time she also helped out at her daughter's gymnastics programs. She was doted on by all of her colleagues. She was a huge and active part in the community. And eventually she and Anaya settled into an apartment in the 1300 block of Brooklyn Lane in Wilmington. And this is a neighborhood that's known as Taylor Home Estates. It's on kind of like the northern outskirts of Wilmington. And by all accounts, they were doing well. But by the summer of 2015, Ebonee's life took a pretty dramatic turn. Now, according to her sister, for about 6 or 7 months, over like spring into summer of 2015, Ebonee was not well. She was constantly cold. She was overwhelmingly tired on a daily basis. She was having joint pain. There was obviously something medically happening. And so she was constantly in and out of doctor's offices, running tests and trying to figure out what was going on. And eventually, in that early summer of 2015, she was diagnosed with lupus, which is a chronic autoimmune disease that can cause widespread inflammation and affect multiple organs and tissues in the body. It is a really challenging illness to have. And so obviously this completely changed Ebonee's life. It weighed heavily on her, not just physically, but mentally as well. This diagnosis seemed to plummet Ebonee into a depression. She worried constantly about her future, her ability to care for Anaya, and what her illness would mean for the life that she had worked so hard to build. Ebonee had always been really close with her family. They spoke every day. They were very supportive of her, but she'd always been a pretty independent person. She took care of herself. She took care of her daughter, and this was threatening her ability to do that. And I can only imagine how scary that probably was for her. But lupus doesn't only affect you physically, it can can also affect you mentally. Apparently, 80 to 90% of lupus patients end up dealing with neuropsychiatric symptoms, so things like brain fog and confusion, being forgetful, and also depression. And so the mental burden was just as difficult to carry as the physical one for Ebonee, and it became really clear that she was in a part of that majority that struggled with things like depression. She began to withdraw from activities that she had once loved: driving, running errands. I mean, things that she used to do every single day with ease suddenly felt impossible to her. Her illness started to impact every single facet of her life. She was unable to hold down a job because of how sick she was. Even simple outings became overwhelming. Her mom has said that Ebonee would sometimes call her in tears from the middle of a grocery store, saying that she wasn't able to even finish shopping. She would go into these extreme panic attacks and have to just drop everything and get herself to somewhere safe until she could calm down. Her confidence was just slowly being chipped away. On top of that, the medication that she was taking began to cause weight gain, which also just added to her distress. Her body was changing. She had little control over pretty much anything, and it felt like everything that she had once relied on, her independence, her health, her sense of self, was just kind of slipping away all at once. And so, trying to help her, her doctor prescribed her antidepressants. But instead of improving like everyone was clinging to at this point, things unfortunately just got worse. According to her family, the medication entirely changed Ebonee. It seemed like she was having some kind of reaction to it, which is something that can come along with antidepressants. Unfortunately, while they can be very helpful for a lot of people, you can also end up going the exact opposite direction of where you want to go. And that is what happened to Ebonee. She started to experience intense paranoia. She thought that people were following her. They were stealing from her. There was this fear and this confusion that was going on that just didn't align with the person that everyone always had known Ebonee to be. It was like her whole life just got completely flipped upside down in a matter of months. It was heartbreaking for her loved ones to see her in such a fragile mental state. Lupus had affected her, and the medicine to try to help her was now making her worse. I mean, if you've ever been in that position or seen anyone that you love in that position where it's like you have to choose which sharp edge of the sword you want to be on, it's awful. It's horrible. And so her family at this point was incredibly alarmed. They knew that something was wrong and that Ebonee was probably going to need more help than they could provide her. They had been trying to support her as much as they could, but it was just slowly getting out of their hands. And her mom said that they even spoke to Ebonee personally about this. She agreed that there was something really wrong and she was probably going to end up in a bad position if it continued going this way. And in the week right before her disappearance, Ebonee really hadn't been doing well. Her family noticed yet another shift in her behavior. I guess she went to a party the weekend before she disappeared, and something just seemed different about her afterward. No one could really put their finger on it. She didn't really say anything, but for whatever reason, she just wasn't doing well, not just mentally, but physically. And so she ended up approaching her family saying, I'm not feeling great. Will you please take Anaya? And this was something that was very common. Ebonee's daughter at this point was 13 years old. She had been taking care of her entire life so far, and this illness had really made that challenging for her. And so her family had no issue stepping in whenever they could to help her out, let her feel better, let her rest, and then they would just keep on pushing forward. This was something new that they were all trying to navigate together. But this time, it just felt like there was something different. Over the next couple of days, Ebonee's behavior just grew increasingly concerning. Her family could see that she wasn't herself. She was incredibly scared and confused and struggling in a way that they hadn't really seen before. And it wasn't just a bad day or a single flare-up. It seemed like there was something deeper that was happening, and so the sense of urgency quickly became impossible to ignore. And on January 14th, 2016, the day before Ebonee disappeared, everything came to a head. Ebonee's family got an unexpected call from her boyfriend at the time, and he was in a panic. He explained to them that something had happened mentally with Ebonee. She was in the middle of some sort of breakdown, and he was following her on the highway trying to make sure she was okay because she was going over 100 miles an hour in a state of complete distress. And so he didn't know what to do. He's like, I'm following her the best I can. I can't get her to slow down. I can't get her to calm down. And so realizing how serious the situation was, Ebonee's parents decided they were going to meet her as soon as possible to try and get her some help. And interestingly, Ebonee actually took herself to the Wilmington Police Department parking lot. And so her family met her there, met her boyfriend there, and she was clearly not okay. So her father went into the police station and started to explain to the front desk what had been happening, that their daughter was having a breakdown. She had been diagnosed with lupus. That had really been affecting her. The medication she was on, she was having some sort of adverse reaction to. She was in a crisis, and they needed her admitted to the hospital as soon as possible. And I think in their minds, going to the police station for help probably meant that action would be taken. I'm sure they thought that was likely a fail-proof way to get Ebonee to go, whether she wanted to or not. Because unfortunately, even though they had several conversations with her about the fact that she would likely need more intense help, and she had agreed, when she was in the middle of this episode, she was really resistant. So right away, officers went out there, they tried to talk to Ebonee, they started speaking to her family, and paramedics ended up being called in to evaluate her. And they even consulted Ebonee's psychiatrist over the phone, but ultimately they determined that she wasn't a threat to herself and others. And so at that point, she didn't meet the criteria for an involuntary psychiatric hold. And with Ebonee at a place at this point where she was not willing to go to a hospital herself, there was really nothing that anyone could do. And so the EMTs and police did speak to her family, and they're like, listen, we've seen her personally, we see her behavior, that she, we're hearing what you're saying. And they actually still urged the family to try to go to the hospital anyways, maybe see if they could get her into some sort of mental health facility, but that would still require the hospital to make that same determination that she was a danger to herself or a danger to others. And since the EMTs and the police had not been able to find her to be a danger, the hospital likely wouldn't either. And so it may have just ended up being another ordeal, another place to go, more scary questions for Ebonee, just to ultimately be turned away. And so Ebonee's family at this point, I'm sure, felt incredibly powerless. She was just racing down a highway, which technically was putting herself and others in danger. So I don't know how they didn't see this as a problem, but regardless, her family knew that she needed help. But again, they can't force the system to intervene unless they met this really narrow legal criteria. Now, her psychiatrist ended up saying that the same medication Ebonee would likely receive at a hospital, they could prescribe it at a local pharmacy. And so ultimately, everyone decided that the best thing to do at this point to get Ebonee help, since she could not be involuntarily committed, would be to get this medication prescribed, pick it up, and just get her in a safe place until she could start taking it. And thankfully, by the end of the time that they all spent at the police station, Ebonee seemed to come out of whatever was going on. She started to get better. She seemed more herself. She was more aware. She was a lot less paranoid. She was willing to work with people. And so I think by the end of the night, they all got to the point where they were like, okay, the worst of the worst is over, and we've got a medication that they say is going to help. We have a plan, and everyone felt comfortable moving forward. So Ebonee and her family left. Now, some sources indicate that Ebonee may have stayed at her parents' house that night, but in an interview that her mom did on the Vanish podcast, she said that Ebonee actually stayed at her own apartment, and one of her close friends offered to stay with her because, again, they did not want her to be alone, but they couldn't get the medicine till the following morning. However, again, because Ebonee seemed to calm down, I don't think anyone was too incredibly concerned about that fact. But regardless of where Ebonee spent the night, what's clear is that her family remained close and supportive, trying their best to ensure that she was safe. Now, the following morning, Friday, January 15th, Ebonee woke up, and according to everyone that was around her, she was back to her normal self. Her family said she was in good spirits. She was lucid. She was not in this frantic, paranoid state that she had been before. And her father did go over to her apartment that morning just to check on her. He wanted to make sure that she had eaten something, make sure that she was, in fact, in a better mental state, make sure that she took her new medication, and she seemed stable and okay. And so they were like, all right, we've got a handle on this. So her dad left, and Ebonee continued on with her plans for that day, completely normal. I mean, she had a meeting to look into a potential job. She had already arranged for a ride to get there since she seemed to struggle with driving. Anaya also stayed with her grandparents that day, and Ebonee was expected to return to their house that night for dinner. It was something that was already pre-planned. And so everything felt calm and back to normal, at least for the moment. But at around 7 p.m. that evening, Ebonee still hadn't shown up for dinner as expected. And I'm sure, based on the night before, that really worried her family. And so they called her to check in, and I don't think she answered the first time, which probably just spiked panic even more. But Ebonee did eventually call her family back, and she seemed completely fine. She seemed level-headed. There were no signs of paranoia or distress. She said that she had just decided that she wasn't going to come over that night. She said she had already eaten a salad. She just wanted to take it easy. And so they planned to just have Anaya continue spending the night at her grandparents' house to let Ebonee kind of level back out. I'm sure she was exhausted from the day before. And while obviously I'm sure all of them wanted her to come over to get eyes on her and make sure she was okay, they also had no reason at this point to continue being worried. But almost immediately after that phone call, something must have changed. A couple of hours later, at around 11 p.m., Ebonee's boyfriend came by her apartment to visit. And this had been planned. This was a planned thing they were doing. They'd actually seen each other earlier that morning. Again, everything was fine. And so when he arrived, her car was parked in its usual spot outside. And so I'm sure he assumed, because they had plans, she was home. And he had a key to her apartment, so he let himself in. But surprisingly, Ebonee wasn't there. And more concerning was what he ended up finding inside. Ebonee's purse, her wallet, bank cards, and pretty much all of her personal belongings were still all in the apartment. And so the only thing missing was Ebonee herself and her cell phone. And so he tried calling her to see where she was. I mean, they had these plans to see each other, so it was kind of weird that she wouldn't be there, but her phone was going straight to voicemail. And so her boyfriend hung out at the apartment hoping that Ebonee would come home. I mean, she was obviously maybe out there somewhere on foot, but maybe she had just gone to see a neighbor or a friend nearby or something. But by around 1 a.m., Ebonee still hadn't returned. And so her boyfriend at this point reached out to her daughter Anaya on the phone to see if maybe she knew where Ebonee was. But to everyone else's knowledge, Ebonee's daughter, her parents, Ebonee was supposed to be at home. It wasn't like her to leave without telling anyone where she was going. Obviously, if she'd also gone somewhere that time of night, it would have been a very quick trip, especially without all of her belongings. But at this point, she had already been gone from the house for at least 2 hours, and she hadn't taken her car, she hadn't taken her wallet, and paired with the events of the night before, it really was not looking good. So by the following morning, Ebonee's family went to the apartment itself, hoping that maybe she had come home during the night. I think the boyfriend left. But when they walked in, everything was exactly how her boyfriend had described it. Her belongings were still left behind. There was still no sign that Ebonee had come home the night before or slept in her bed. There was no disturbance, no sign of Ebonee at all, and her car was still parked outside of the apartment. And so for the next several hours, her family was calling around to friends, they were talking to neighbors, anyone who might have seen her, and they hoped this entire time that she would show up, that there was some sort of simple explanation. But unfortunately, she didn't. And so as the hours stretched on, their concern quickly turned to dread. And so fearing the worst, they reported her missing to the Wilmington Police Department that same day. But, and this is an incredibly frustrating detail, that particular weekend was a holiday weekend. MLK Day was that Monday, and so authorities did not begin an official search for Ebonee until the following Tuesday. We're talking 4 days after she went missing. And this delay left her family devastated, as it would any family in this situation, because precious time, those critical first 48 hours, slipped away with no active search underway. And while I have never personally worked in a police department or, have any specific knowledge on this one in particular, police departments don't just stop because there's a holiday. That's not really how it works. Crime doesn't stop because it's a holiday. And so there's always going to be someone there or on call that can figure out situations like this. And the officer that spoke in the Vanish podcast said that they have protocol where, they reached out to the on-call person. They go through if this is like an urgent matter or not. They exhaust all available possibilities of where this person could be. And obviously, if it's important enough, they will come in and start a full-blown investigation. But obviously that didn't happen, which is so crazy to me considering the fact that just not even 48 hours before, Ebonee had been in the parking lot of that police station having a mental crisis, okay? And so you would think with that information paired with the fact that she went missing in the middle of the night the next night, that it would initiate an immediate response. This isn't just an adult that is missing, that's just decided to randomly wander off from her life. This is someone that is very likely experiencing a mental health crisis, but there was no immediate response at all. And so by the time police officially launched their search on Tuesday, Ebonee's family and friends had already spent days trying to find her. They weren't going to sit around and wait for the holiday to be over. And so they had been calling around, canvassing the area. They'd even already made and printed out and distributed flyers, all desperately trying to retrace her steps and figure out where she would have gone. And when it comes to having lupus, this was just another thing that was very alarming. Like I already explained, one of her first symptoms was that she was so cold all the time, and she already hated the cold, okay? As a North Carolinian, right now it's like 95 degrees outside with a humidity of hell. And so your body is just so naturally attuned to the heat and the humidity. So even 50 degrees feels so freezing cold all winter long, okay? So pair the fact that she already did not like the cold with the fact that she was struggling with lupus, she would have been freezing. She would not have wandered off in the freezing cold unless there was something seriously going on. And also remember that Ebonee was the baby of the family. She had been so close with her entire family her whole life. And obviously, while everyone doesn't tell their parents everything, she spoke to her mom every day. I mean, they were very open and candid and honest with each other. Her mom knew her behaviors like the back of her hand and knew right away there was something more going on here. And so now, finally, by Tuesday, when there was a formal investigation underway, detectives started their own investigation, and they too were trying to piece together Ebonee's movements. And so they started also speaking to neighbors, conducting interviews. They also claimed to be conducting searches around her apartment and the immediate surrounding areas to try and determine where Ebonee may have gone. But there's just not a lot out there about what exactly they did and when exactly they did it in these first few days. And it kind of seems like the police department was doing their thing and Ebonee's family was doing theirs. So in the very early days of the investigation, police did publicly state that Ebonee, they believed, was last seen at her apartment, or at least last at her apartment. And I don't know if they fully base that off the fact that her mom had been told she was outside of her home smoking a cigarette at around 7 p.m., or if they had anything else to suggest this. But this statement left her family and the public kind of clinging to that one piece of information. And based on that understanding, the initial search efforts by law enforcement and the family, as well as Community United Effort, also known as Q, they were all searching around her apartment complex and the immediate surrounding areas. And so multiple searches were conducted by all of these different groups. They had canine units, they had volunteers combing through nearby grounds and wooded areas. Being that her apartment area was located on the northern outskirts of Wilmington, there's a lot of like marshland and farmland. It's a lot of just nothing. It's a lot of just weird coastal region. And so I'm sure it was a pretty challenging place to go, because if she had left her apartment and gone anywhere south or east, she would have gotten into like the major areas of Wilmington. We're talking huge shopping centers and downtown and marinas and restaurants. But if she had gone north, she would have ended up in the middle of nowhere. And so the search was already going to be incredibly challenging. But then a couple weeks into the investigation, it turns out they may have been looking in the wrong place the entire time. So about 3 weeks after Ebonee vanished, the police announced a major and shocking update, one that would completely change the direction of the investigation. All of a sudden, they revealed that they had reviewed surveillance footage and discovered that Ebonee had actually been in the Wilmington Police Department the night that she disappeared. I repeat, she had been at the police department. Now, this department, and it's actually the headquarters, there's like several different substations, but the location on Best Street where she was seen is only about half a mile from where Ebonee lived at the Taylor Home Estates in North Wilmington. And according to police, Ebonee arrived at the department headquarters at around 8 p.m. that night. And so this was just an hour after that last phone call she had with her mom. And depending on pace and the way she went, she could have gotten there in like 15 minutes. So as I said, something happened very quickly after that phone conversation with her mom. Now, the surveillance footage that they somehow didn't know they had for weeks, which sadly does not include audio, shows Ebonee entering the building, and she approaches the front desk to ask to use the phone. And the officer that was sitting at the desk apparently directed her to a phone in the public lobby that she could use. Police stated that the footage shows Ebonee appearing frustrated as she was trying to use the phone, almost as if she couldn't get it to work. And at one point, they say that Ebonee began cursing and kind of behaving erratically. She was crying, she was clearly in distress. And so the front desk officer reportedly asked her, do you need help? Do you need me to call EMS for you? Like, what is going on here? But Ebonee allegedly declined assistance and ended up ultimately walking out of the department about 10 minutes after she arrived. And Ebonee's behavior had been so concerning and so out of the ordinary that they even got up and checked the phone. Like, what about this phone made her so upset that she was cursing and crying? They thought it was broken, but it was working completely fine. And so it only made what they had just witnessed that much more puzzling. But apparently not puzzling enough to do anything to stop her from leaving in that sort of mental state. But I guess because she said she didn't want help or need help, they just washed their hands of it. Now, Ebonee's family was shown this footage privately, and they've described what they saw as being absolutely heartbreaking. To them, it was clear that Ebonee was trying to get help. That's obviously why she had gone there in the first place. According to them, it looked as if Ebonee walked in, she went to the desk, she went to the phone, and then she just began pacing back and forth between the two, talking to someone at the front desk, again, obviously asking for assistance. She was clearly in crisis, and eventually she just walked away. She walked away alone from a place where she had been seeking help. And knowing what we know now, that after that she vanished, was devastating for her family to see. And so this revelation came as a shock to many people, especially to Ebonee's family, because for weeks the local media had been reporting on her disappearance, and everyone was saying she was last seen at her apartment. That was the only known movement of Ebonee that night. So now knowing that she had walked into a police department that night, clearly seeking help, changed everything. And it forced them to rethink everything they thought they knew about those last critical hours. Obviously, they had speculated that maybe something happened to Ebonee mentally. Maybe she started falling into a state of paranoia again. But they didn't know until they saw this footage that something really had gone very wrong right after she got off the phone with her mom. But that wasn't the only shocking bit of information that they got that day. Another unexpected detail emerged and was released right after the police said, hey, by the way, she actually came into our station that night right before she disappeared. So that sighting placed her at the station at around 8 p.m. However, they claimed that they had another witness claiming to have seen Ebonee a few hours later back near her apartment complex. And so this witness, who was reportedly visiting the area from out of town, stated that sometime between 10 and 10:45 p.m., Ebonee approached them and asked for a cigarette. And they said they didn't have one. I think they were smoking their last one. And so she reportedly mentioned that she was going to go to a nearby gas station to buy some for herself. But this tip was met with skepticism because this person, this witness, didn't even know Ebonee. They'd never seen her before, from my understanding, didn't know her personally. And so how could they say for sure it was her? And how was this person determined to be a credible source? Something about it just felt kind of off. What happened in those final hours was only becoming more difficult to untangle. And it wasn't just Ebonee's family who was confused. The local media at this point was also scrambling to keep up with the shifting narrative that all happened kind of on this day. And apparently someone, I'm not sure if it was reporters or Ebonee's family, actually went to this one mini mart that Ebonee reportedly said she was walking toward, the only one that was within reasonable walking distance from her house that was open at the time. And someone went to check to see if police followed up there, to see if they knew anything about where Ebonee may have gone next. Did she even make it there to begin with? Did they have surveillance footage? What was her mental state like? And shockingly, they ended up finding out that the police had never even been by there to ask them any questions or request any surveillance footage. They had deemed this tip credible, but they hadn't followed up on it. They hadn't checked to see if anyone at the gas station remembered her, if she ever made it there, where she went next. if there was surveillance footage. Like, it just didn't make sense what they were doing and what they weren't doing. And around this same exact time, police also stated that they would not be releasing the surveillance footage from the police department to the public. And they very publicly and clearly stated that it was out of respect for Ebonee's family. That's why they weren't going to release it. And I mean, they were digging their heels in. They're like, nope, we're trying to do right by them. But Ebonee's family ended up coming forward saying, what on earth are you talking about? Like, we want that footage released. They believed that seeing exactly what Ebonee was wearing and her state of mind that night could help trigger someone's memory and generate new leads, and that keeping the footage private wasn't helping their search for answers. There had already been so much wasted time. I mean, they had possibly lost surveillance footage from that mini mart if she'd ever gone there. On top of that, they had also been saying that she was wearing jeans, Timberlands, and a white t-shirt that night. But surveillance footage from the police department shows that she was wearing a purple hoodie with the word staff written across it. So they hadn't even been giving out the most accurate description of what Ebonee was dressed as and what she looked like at the time. But unfortunately, despite the family's wishes to have this shared, police still refused to release the footage. And at this point, they even shifted their reasoning from, oh, well, we're doing this to, help protect Ebonee's family and, to be respectful to them, to now they were saying they were withholding it to protect the integrity of the investigation. And I totally get both of those separate reasonings, but this didn't feel genuine either way. It just kind of felt like moving targets all over the place. And it only added to the growing frustration and mistrust surrounding how the case was being handled. And then, just when it seemed like the confusion couldn't get any worse, another piece of the puzzle surfaced. A few months into the investigation, police shared yet another delayed revelation. They had discovered that earlier that same evening that Ebonee went missing, before she even went to the police station, there had been another sighting. Ebonee had also visited the community Boys and Girls Club, which is off of Nixon, and it's literally just down the road from where she lived. And so when this part of the timeline was finally shared, it helped to fill in more pieces of the puzzle, but it also raised even more questions about what Ebonee had been experiencing that night and why she had been moving from place to place in such a distressed state. So this is the timeline that we know to this point. So her family spoke to her at around 7 p.m. That's when Ebonee called to cancel dinner. She said she'd already eaten, and that was the last direct contact that her family had with her. And it was not long after this call, my assumption is it was probably within 30 minutes, that someone driving a van from the Community Boys and Girls Club saw Ebonee walking along Nixon Road. And so according to sources, this van was actually being driven by someone that knew Ebonee. And so when they saw her, they pulled over, and it became immediately apparent that she was in a state of distress. According to this driver, Ebonee told them that she believed someone was following her and that she was scared. And so, concerned for her safety, the driver was like, all right, I'm going to take you back to the Boys and Girls Club, again, just right down the road. And they instructed her to stay there while they finished their route, and they would come back and take her wherever she needed to go to get help. But at least she would be in a public space with other people, being kept safe until she was able to get to wherever she wanted to go next. She started to ask several employees there if they had phone chargers, explaining that her phone was dead. And according to them, she appeared paranoid and visibly shaken. And at some point, she ended up leaving the building on foot. So she didn't wait for this friend of hers to come back to safely get her from one destination to the next. For whatever reason, she just decided to leave. And her next stop ended up being the Wilmington Police Department, which again was just kind of located a short distance away. So she arrived there on foot at around 8 p.m. and this is where she was captured in the surveillance footage attempting to use the lobby phone before leaving 10 minutes later. And her whole movements of this night are so interesting to me, and I'm so happy that it's been pieced together, the different things that she did and the different things that she spoke to people about, because I thought it was so strange that she went to the police department before knowing about this Boys and Girls Club to use the phone. Like, why would she have needed to use the phone when her home was less than half a mile away? But to hear that she also got a ride from someone clearly distressed walking away from her home to the Boys and Girls Club, and she was also clearly trying to get her phone working then as well, it just gives me this overwhelming feeling that for whatever reason, she didn't feel safe being at home. home. Where she was at the Boys and Girls Club, she probably could have gotten home just as fast as she could have gotten to the police department. So what was it about her home where she felt uncomfortable not returning? I feel like this just kind of underlines just how frightened and desperate she must have felt during those moments and how much she was trying to protect herself, even if we still don't necessarily understand from what. So after this point, there's a pretty big gap of time. We know the Wilmington Police Department is located half a mile from Taylor Home Estates. If she walked directly home after leaving the police station at around 8:10, she likely would have gotten back home around 15 minutes later. And so that would have put her back in the area of her home at around 8:25 p.m. at the earliest. And she may have made it back. We don't know for sure when she came back to her apartment, but she wasn't seen again until this witness claims to have seen her at around 10 to 10:45 p.m. when she was asking for a cigarette. That leaves more than 2 hours of a gap in the timeline. And we know that possibly 15 minutes after she left to go and get cigarettes from the local mini mart, her boyfriend showed up at her apartment and tried to call her and her phone was dead. So was she not at her apartment that entire 2 hours because she was scared to be there? Something about this is just not quite sitting right, because if she had made it back to her home and she was so desperate to make these phone calls that she's cursing and freaking out in the police department, why didn't she go home and immediately charge her phone? And so in the weeks and months that followed these revelations, the search for Ebonee continued. Detective Childress, who eventually was put on Ebonee's case, I believe it was years later, eventually publicly spoke about the case and gave just kind of a more clear idea of what exactly they did during that time frame. And apparently they searched Ebonee's apartment several times for clues. They searched the grounds of her apartment complex and all of the surrounding areas. There were people on foot. There were canine units. There were people on horseback. There were helicopters that were utilized. Nearby bodies of water were also allegedly searched, not just nearby her home, but also anywhere that she may have gone along her walking routes. But when it comes to the bodies of water being searched, which was honestly one of my first worries when I started looking into this case, I'm not sure how thoroughly they could have searched these areas, because again, we are talking about coastal North Carolina here. And just north of her apartment and the police department is a creek. There's also Cape Fear River just to the west of where she lived. There's tons of marshland, like I already told you before. And so I'm not sure how thoroughly they could have searched all of these areas. And the Cape Fear is huge. And it also eventually opens up into the ocean a few miles south. And so it just feels like it's almost impossible to narrow down where to search for Ebonee, because there's so many possibilities. And all of these possibilities feel so big and so scary. Now, Community United Effort, led by Monica Kaysen, also was heavily involved from the very beginning. I believe they were actually there before the police even got involved. And Monica, I think, was even at her daughter's wedding when news about Ebonee's disappearance got to her, and she was taking breaks between helping her daughter get ready and the reception and all of that to try and go ahead and get people on the ground looking for her. And so all of January and February of 2016, Q volunteers, along with Ebonee's family and friends, they conducted their own daily searches with ATVs, their own search dogs, on foot. They combed through wooded areas, abandoned lots and waterways, drainage areas between her apartment and the Boys and Girls Club. They also checked around the police department just in case, because the police department is in a bit of a more like out of the way area. They were trying to rule out as many places as possible that Ebonee could have gone. Now, in 2017, investigators did receive a tip suggesting potential foul play in Ebonee's case. Now, according to a tip that they got, Ebonee had allegedly stolen a large sum of money from an ex-boyfriend of hers while living in Georgia. And she did this allegedly, again, right before returning to Wilmington. But when this tip came forward, her family, friends, and most of the public were baffled by the allegation, because first and foremost, Ebonee had arrived back home in Wilmington years and years earlier. So it just seemed kind of weird that she might have taken money from someone, and now all of a sudden they were coming back to seek their revenge. Not just that, Ebonee came home broke as a joke, y'all, and she needed support. Like, her mom was like, no, she did not come back with any sort of money. Like, we had to help her make sure she got back up on her feet. And not just that, but this kind of behavior was entirely out of character for her. And on top of that, When her family pressed for details, asking who the supposed ex was, like how did this information come to light, no one could even provide them with a name of this person that may be mad because Ebonee stole their money. But regardless of how strange her family believed this tip was, it prompted North Carolina authorities to enlist the help of not just the GBI, but also the FBI. They put a significant effort into verifying these potential claims, but through follow-ups and cross-agency coordinations, nothing credible at all ever came of it. The tip was never substantiated and it led nowhere. And this is one of those really strange feelings because I am one that's all for going for the stretches, something that seems implausible. If you watched my video on the Winarka suitcase girl and the Angela Belanglo a couple weeks ago, a stretch is exactly what solved that case. And so on one hand, you're relieved that law enforcement is putting in serious effort into Ebonee's case, but on the other, it's kind of hard to ignore how inconsistent that effort seems because they didn't even check surveillance footage from the last place she was reportedly heading, yet they launched a full-scale, multi-state federal investigation in Georgia based purely on an unverified tip. Then in January of 2022, marking the 6-year anniversary of Ebonee's disappearance, Q ended up returning for another massive renewed search. And this time they actually partnered with Brunswick County Search and Rescue teams and Wilmington Police Department. And they focused on the same key areas between the Boys and Girls Club, Ebonee's apartment complex, and the most likely walking routes that she may have taken that night. And it seems a lot of these areas had probably already been searched before, but I believe this time they had everyone attached to GPS trackers. They monitored everybody's movement to ensure they got the most accurate search done of the area as possible. They were rechecking places that had overgrown or changed over time. They used ATVs, canine units, covered the ground on foot. But despite these extensive search efforts, not a single trace of Ebonee was found still. But Q made it very clear that these searches still served a purpose. Some of these places were places Ebonee's family had been wondering if she was at this entire time. And so at least they were able to more confidently check all of these places off of their list. But that means that all of these local places that make the most sense for her to have been, she's not there. So where on earth could she have gone?
7 years have now passed since someone last reported seeing 30-year-old Ebonee Spears, but Ebonee's family still remembers it as if it were yesterday.
She's loving, always happy, and she's like always caring.
The memories are sweet to reminisce upon, but bitter when you realize how long it's been since Harriet Rivers has seen her daughter's face or heard her voice.
How can anyone endure, not knowing nothing about a family member that's been missing beyond a year, really, but 7 years it's just unbelievable. Call me and say, hey, Mom, just to talk and check in on each other every day. It was just, that is what I truly, truly miss.
Now, nearly a decade later, Ebonee's family is still out there searching for answers, and each year that passes without new information feels heavier for them. Anaya, who was just a child when her mom disappeared, is now growing up still without her mom. She's going through milestones that I know Ebonee would have loved to have been there for. Harriet has said that Anaya has tried to be strong, but there's not a day that goes by where she doesn't think of her mom. Ebonee's family, and also, thankfully, the local media is not letting Ebonee's story disappear. In January of 2025, on the 9-year anniversary of Ebonee's disappearance, local news outlets once again plastered Ebonee all over Wilmington, and they also reached out to the Wilmington Police Department for an update, and a spokesperson did respond saying, quote, Ebonee Spears' case is still an active case assigned to a detective. We do receive periodic information that is followed up on, much of which we are unable to share publicly since the case is still open and active, but we can't urge the public enough to come forward with any information they might have. Detective Childress also acknowledged in recent coverage saying, quote, we don't fully understand what she was going through or what was happening with her. There's nothing to indicate that she intended to go off into the night and disappear. We don't know what happened with her. She walked away, and as far as we know, no one ever saw her again. And that's the chilling reality, that there's no evidence of foul play, there's no confirmed sightings, there's no recovered items, just a mother who was last seen struggling, looking for help, and then nothing. Her mama said it is like Wilmington opened up and swallowed Ebonee whole. Now, her mom has remained incredibly vocal and strong throughout all of this, and she also spoke on the 9-year anniversary about the fact that she believes someone has information out there that they're harboring. She said, quote, "Nothing happens in this city that nobody knows about." She believes, as so many do, that someone out there knows what happened to Ebonee that night, because Ebonee didn't just vanish. Like, you don't just disappear without someone seeing something. Like, she could not have just walked off without someone driving by, without someone talking to her, making sure she was okay. Look at how many different people she came in contact with in those last few hours before she dropped off the radar. It's so hard to believe that after that, there was just nothing. Her mom feels in her heart that someone had to have stopped Ebonee along her path, possibly someone she knew and trusted, and she believes it's possible that someone may have convinced Ebonee to get into the car.
Ebonee's mom is still looking for answers about what happened to her daughter on that night. WECT's Delaney Tarpley talked to Rivers as another anniversary nears with no updates on the case. Delaney, what does she say that the last 9 years have felt like for her?
John, her exact words were, "It feels like an eternity." She has so many questions about Ebonee, why she went missing, where is she now, and if she's even alive. Even if the answers are things she doesn't want to hear, she said it would be better than not knowing.
All over Harriet Rivers' living room, you can see reminders of her daughter Ebonee.
And that's what I want, so when I can just turn my head either way and look at her or talk to her. And sometimes I just look at her and say, "Hey, little girl, miss you." Never thought that it would get to be 9 years. I just praying that Lord let this be the last year.
She believes someone, either a stranger or someone Ebonee knew, stopped and got Ebonee in their car. She thinks someone still in Wilmington knows something.
Nothing happens in this city that nobody knows about. Somebody knows something. If it happens, somebody knows.
Rivers drives a car with posters of Ebonee and keeps a sign up in her front yard, hoping that someone who knows something will see it. Even if the news she gets is that her daughter is no longer alive, Rivers says that would be easier to accept than the constant wondering.
Sit around here and wonder, is she's okay? Is she well? Is she being taken care of? You know, it's just like, you don't want to have to constantly think about those questions. It's better knowing.
But for now, she'll hold on to the hope that one day Ebonee will walk back through her front door.
That's all I pray, that the Lord keep me here long enough to see my child. Not giving up on that thought, that hope.
Harriet's never believed that Ebonee just simply vanished of her own accord. And honestly, it's hard to imagine otherwise. And as Detective Childress just said in the statement, they have no evidence to support that being a possibility either. Ebonee left her purse behind, her wallet, her bank cards, her car, literally everything that was important to her. And she had been clearly trying to reach out for help that night, not planning to walk away from her life. The fact alone that she was moving between trusted spaces, places like the Boys and Girls Club, the police department, and home, it shows she was actively seeking safety, not running from it. And this is also where the location she went missing becomes incredibly important, because Wilmington is not just a quiet residential town. Like, even though I say she lived on the outskirts of Wilmington, she was just blocks away from busy downtown Wilmington. This is a college town, a tourist town. Even in the middle of January like this, there's still people that go out there. They have a Christmas boat parade. Like, there is so much happening at Wilmington all of the time, especially downtown. She was really close to a popular marina, popular restaurants, and it was a Friday night, you guys. People would have been everywhere. And Ebonee's apartment was all within walking distance of all of this, a heavily trafficked area. A lot of people have suggested that maybe she got in the car with someone somewhere between her house and going to this mini mart. But if she was paranoid, I don't really see her getting into the car with a stranger, at least not willingly, which makes me agree with her mom that someone she knows may have picked her up. It's possible that they took advantage of her vulnerable state. I feel like if someone had approached her, someone she didn't know, someone that was trying to get her to leave with them or something, if it was a stranger and the state of mind she was in, thinking she was being followed and running from place to place trying to get help, she would have caused such a huge scene. And in that case, again, I find it even more unbelievable that no one heard or saw anything. But I think it's just as possible as well that she got scared. We know that she thought someone was following her, possibly wanted to harm her, so maybe she walked off somewhere trying to escape this person or people, and maybe she tried to hide and ended up in a place where she got lost or trapped. I also want to say that I feel like it's very easy, given her mental state, to write off her fear as something that wasn't actually happening, that it was just paranoia, her thinking something was going on that wasn't. But I just can't stop thinking about this party that her family mentioned the weekend prior, and the fact that after that is when she seemed to really start to become terrified. And so it makes me wonder if something happened at this party. And it's even more suspicious because her family said that everyone who had been at the party, people that claimed to be her friends, refused to speak about it afterwards. And so I just don't want her fear to immediately be written off as something that wasn't real, because it very well could have been. But at this point, without new evidence or leads, police haven't ruled anything out. Foul play has not been ruled out, mental health factors have not been ruled out, and they continue to describe her case as open and active, following up on every tip that comes in. But without more information, every possible theory remains just that, a theory, until someone comes forward with a piece of the puzzle that eventually explains what exactly happened to Ebonee Spears and where she's at. And so if someone is out there holding on to information, which seems to be what not just Ebonee's family, but the police potentially believe, I truly hope that they come forward, because Ebonee deserves that. Her family deserves that. Ebonee is 5'8". She weighed 130 pounds at the time she disappeared. She has black hair and brown eyes, but I have seen that at the time of her disappearance, her hair was blonde. She also has a tattoo of a rose on her right shoulder and a butterfly on the top of her right foot. Ebonee is so much more than headlines about her disappearance. She's a loving mom. She's a daughter, a sister, a friend, someone that deserved support and safety during her most vulnerable moments. It's heartbreaking to think how quickly life can change. Ebonee was raising her daughter. She was working. She was thriving. She was living a beautiful life, making plans with her boyfriend to move and, push for more. And then one illness and a couple of medications meant to help her ended up unraveling it all and leading to a decade of not knowing. And that is something that could happen to anyone and is one of the most devastating parts of this case. So please share Ebonee's story, you guys. The more eyes and ears we can reach, the better chance that someone will come forward and finally bring her family the answers that they have waited so long for. If you have any information at all about what happened to Ebonee or her whereabouts, I will make sure to have all the information you need to get in contact with the right people down below in the description box. Don't forget also that you can submit a tip anonymously. So if you're worried about that, you don't have to be. On that note, you guys, I'm going to go ahead and go. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to Ebonee's story. And if you haven't already, go ahead and hit the subscribe button down below to become a part of the Hallan fam so we can hopefully bring them home together or bring them justice together. And I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.